Dear ladies and gentlemen, we're very happy that you are with us today on this occasion of the online talk on security policy. My name is Lukas Wank. I'm the co-director of Shapka and will guide you through the discussion of us today. With me is also Sophie Maria Satanakis. Hello, Sophia.
Hello.
Hi. And Michael Zinkanel. Hi, Michael.
Hi there, thank you.
Hi. Both are from the Austria Institute for Europe and Security Policy, and but we will get to their bios and their background in just a minute. Also with us today is Katherine Jews. She's also from the AIES, the Austria Institute for Europe and Security Policy, and she's taking good care of us in the background. You cannot see her and hear her, but she's there, and thank you very much, Katherine, for your technical oversight. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to today's joint event from the Vienna-based Austrian Institute for Europe and Security Policy, the AIES. I hope I get it right throughout the discussion. It's always a bit of a stumbler. And Shapka, my organization, to discuss what influence COVID-19 has on security policy. And of course, given the name of the institute and our location, we will have a special focus on the European perspective in this regard. I do so on behalf of the AIES, which has been researching on as well as providing demand-oriented analysis and recommendations on various issues regarding the European Union and the European integration process since 1969, so already 24 years of operations. In doing so, the Institute and its team of experts lies a focus on security policy, defense policy, the European neighborhood policy, and since it's Vienna-based, also on the Austrian foreign security and defense policy in particular. The second hosting organization is the strategic think and do tank Shapka, and Shapka is Arabic for network, and a network is what is based upon indeed the civil society network that roughly spans from, I would say, Brussels to Aleppo and Sarajevo to Vienna, has been focusing on security, foreign and development policy for the last 7 years, and it has been integrating strategy and policy from the bottom up ever since. Before we get started and delve deeper into today's both connected topics, I give you some announcements on what's going to be the agenda of today and how we're going to do the Q&A at the later stage. After giving you an oversight of the topic and broadly outlining what it's about, our two distinguished experts, Michael and Sophia, will give you their perspective for what's at stake for European security. And after this, we will get into a Q&A session with both Michael and Sophia, and there we will also have the opportunity to bring in questions that interest you. So feel free to ask questions at any time. Katherine in the background will collect the questions, and we will sum them up at a later stage, later throughout the talk, and bring them to our both experts' attention. Since Shapka and the AIES both have a long history of organizing joint events, one prime example was the 2018 Future Strategist Hub. We built on this expertise and experience of the past, and have convened Michael and Sophia for a very timely reason. Since the world is changing around us, is changing at an unprecedented speed, and already before COVID, and since COVID-19 has started to spread over the world at the beginning of this year, there is no end to changes in global dynamics to see so far. Against this background, on the one hand, we will focus on the issue of disinformation during COVID-19 as an extraordinarily pressing issue, as we will learn from Michael, who will depict the issue of disinformation from a European perspective. And on the other hand, we will revisit the EU-NATO relations. And in this regard, Sophia will explore what enhanced cooperation can mean amidst increased uncertainty that we live in. This twofold approach, so a broader EU-NATO security relations issue and disinformation is a more particular issue, will allow us not only to look to the west across the Atlantic, but also to the east and major players like Russia or China, but also to what's right in between, namely to us, to Europe itself, and how Europe can react to it and what changes it will bring. From both points of the compass, east and west, manifold changes have overturned long-standing strategic wisdom of the past, already well before COVID-19, and there have been quite a few signals over the last years already. For example, just take Ukraine in 2014, or Brexit, or Donald Trump's election in 2016, just to name but a few. This has not only produced new realities, but also quite a few tensions and wider complexities, as I would call it. Some of them are more visible than others. In any case, we will look at both kinds today. The more visible, hard dimension, as in EU-NATO relations, and the more invisible and proper, maybe you can say soft dimension, as in disinformation, as Michael will tell us. To start us off, it is now my pleasure to introduce Sophia Maria Satanakis, who has recently published a paper on EU-NATO relations together with the AIES Head of Institute, Velina Chakarova, who is not with us today, unfortunately. Sophia finished the bachelor program Balkans, Slavic and Oriental Studies in Greece and graduated from the postgraduate university program of European Studies in Vienna. She has been with the AIES since 2013 and been working there as a research fellow. Her focus covers the topic of European integration, focusing mainly on EU foreign security and defense policy. She also concentrates on Greece and Turkey, as well as the bilateral relations. She will now introduce us to trends and developments regarding the transatlantic alliance, as well as potential implications of future cooperations between EU and NATO, in light of the impact that COVID-19 has. So, Sophia, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucas. Thank you for the kind introduction. Hello from my side. It's a great pleasure for me to be part of this talk today, together with my colleague Michael. And before I kick off, I just want to make a tiny little correction. The AIS was established in 1996 and not 69. That would be a quite long period of existence. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So I will leave it at that. I will try to briefly summarize the main takeaways from our joint publication with Velina Chakarova on EU-NATO relations within approximately 5 or 6 minutes, starting with the fact that the European Union and NATO, of course, are facing currently, and they will continue to face, an increasingly complex and unpredictable security environment, which includes, just to name a few, persistent hybrid threats, terrorist threats, disinformation campaigns. Michael will elaborate on that. Increasing instability in the MENA region, a more self-confident China, a more assertive Turkey and Russia, a crumbling multilateral order, and so on and so forth. The list gets longer and longer, so we could just devote an hour talking about that. And this year, 2020, early on proved to be extremely crucial for both the EU and NATO because of the COVID-19 virus outbreak, which, apart from its disruptive political and socioeconomic consequences, is also expected to have a negative impact on all countries' defense budgets and planned expenditures. So we'll see what will happen there. I will elaborate more on that later on. And we also have in a couple of months the upcoming presidential elections in the United States. Lucas, you already mentioned that briefly in the introduction, where we're about to find out whether the so-called Trump effect, if I may call it that, is just a one-time temporary phenomenon, or if, heaven forbid, it's a deep transformative trend in the politics of the United States. Having said that, in the paper, we also highlighted the fact that we have a visible deepening of the cooperation between EU and NATO, especially on an institutional level, which is in contrast to Donald Trump's narrative and his quite often frank criticism and threats and negative announcements when it comes to NATO and the European partners. But nevertheless, the cooperation within the two institutions is getting deeper and deeper as the years go on, starting perhaps a couple of years ago with the NATO summit in Wales in 2014. And not only that, but during his term in office, the United States have increased their contributions to NATO, which on the one side shows that the European NATO members still have not lost their importance to the United States, and also that the United States is still more or less committed to NATO, despite all the things that are said by our dear president. So we identified some potential trends for the future EU-NATO cooperation, which should be carefully monitored over the next weeks, months, years to come. I will just name like 3 or 4 of them. There are more, but feel free to read the publication on our website for more detail. The first one is that because of COVID-19, because of the outbreak, we might also be confronted in Europe, especially with the crisis of confidence and solidarity, which could lead to increased fragmentation, either within the EU institutions or between the EU member states, which will also affect the European Union's outlook and engagement when it comes to geopolitics and geoeconomic goals. Second, also related to COVID-19, is the fact that it's quite possible to have a serious reduction in defense budgets and expenditures, which would make it, if not difficult, let's say difficult, not impossible, to achieve the 2% NATO target on defense spending by 2024, which is already in like 4 years. Then there is also a trend towards the so-called bilateralization of international relations, which would again have a negative impact on the transatlantic strategies, transatlantic policies, and so on and so forth. And of course, I have to mention Brexit. The United Kingdom has left the European Union, and as a result of that, London might try to pursue a way of bilateral negotiations and agreements with France on the one side and Germany on the other, which could eventually lead to renewed tensions between Berlin and Paris, which could impact the Franco-German cooperation, which is the driving force behind the common security and defense policy of the European Union. So we will have to wait and see what's going on there. There are some other trends, but I will try not to take up too much time. What can be done about it? Well, the European Union should first and foremost try to adapt as good as possible to this new global political reality with this constant, more or less, ring of instability surrounding us, and try to promote our interests and our values as much as possible, as coherent as possible, without relying solely on American help. we have to say that even until this day, NATO remains the most important collective defense organization for European security for obvious reasons. But in parallel to that, European defense integration is still being promoted. We're still working on that. So we have kind of a two-way approach. On the one side, NATO. On the other hand, we're trying to establish ourselves as a European security actor, a credible security actor ourselves. And I will try and leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for this valuable insight and your expertise. Based on what you have just told us and what we've heard, allow me just one quick follow-up question right away before we jump over to hear Michael's input. You touched upon a few topics that have been circulating around the EU-NATO relations, about NATO as an organization in particular as well. And from your perspective, what would be the most likely topics for the, so to say, upcoming NATO summits? So what will be, or in other words, what will be the topics to stay for NATO, basically? What will we need to focus on, and what will NATO probably focus on in the next years?
Well, I would say there are a couple of things that are here to stay. Starting with the most old issue, which is starting with the burden sharing issue, which is quite an old issue already, maybe as old as the alliance itself, which was that the European NATO members should contribute more. That they should do more, should engage more, and so on and so forth. And it's not just Donald Trump who's been pushing for that. It's also his predecessors. So it's a very, very old issue, which was already a topic at the NATO summit in London last year. And I think it will be in the next summits as well. Another issue that is here to stay is China, which again at the NATO summit in December was a very important topic of discussion. It was mentioned for the first time that China poses challenges and opportunities, and also that it could be a potential strategic threat to the West. So I think we have China as a permanent item on our agenda, NATO agenda, because Austria is not a NATO member, so I cannot say our agenda. So passionate about the topic. And the third one is maybe also climate change, which is more and more in the coming. It was not so much a topic in the past, but I think we can certainly expect it to be in the future. And another very old topic that's here to stay is Russia, which was also last summit. It was recognized again as one of the most existential threats for transatlantic security.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much for that follow-up explanation. Generally, thank you once more for your very interesting outline on the I would say transatlantic security architecture and the recent topics on that. Let us now get a bit deeper into one particular topic and continue with Michael, who will for us uncover the invisible layer of COVID-19 beyond the physical health layer and crisis that has, as disinformation has the potential to virtually affect people's lives through transmitting false information, as you have outlined in your recent paper. Michael has studied peace and conflict studies in Sweden and international development or development studies in Vienna, and previously worked for the Austrian Ministry of Defense and has been with the AIES, which is not 50 plus years old. Thank you for the correction, Sophia, but since 96 in working, has been since with the AIS since 2019. And they're working and analyzing the EU integration process as well as EU security policy, with a focus on mainly hybrid threats, security policy, and disinformation. In addition, Michael is also the Secretary General for the Think and Do Tank Shapka. So there's also there's also a common thread in this, another common thread in this event today, and the Chapka, he's involved with organizing and implementing projects and events. Michael, as I've just mentioned, you've recently published a paper on disinformation. What were your main findings, and what does disinformation, what does make disinformation campaigns such a pressing issue nowadays?
Thank you very much, Lucas, for the kind introduction. Thank you also, Sophia, for your words before. I'm very happy that we're both here today and that we have this opportunity of this joint event, this joint AIS and Chapka event today. I will jump right into the topic, and probably would like to thank you again, Lucas, for this very interesting phrasing of the introduction. The invisible threat. I think that's a very good way to describe disinformation as a new form of a hybrid threat that is, yes, indeed, not conventional, not that visible, and therefore, in our perception or our awareness, relatively new. So the conventional parameters and the conventional dimensions of warfare were usually 3: land, air, and sea. And now we have entered a phase, especially with digitalization, with new technical means, with information technologies being such a vital aspect of our daily lives, professional and personal lives. And this new dimension is being militarized, is being also defined and increasingly becoming a security field, and also therefore an unconventional dimension of warfare, where disinformation campaigns is certainly one aspect. Having that said, I mentioned before that it is beginning to become a topic in our awareness, in our security awareness. However, disinformation is not a very new topic. It has been used throughout different areas of warfare, and it traces back actually 2,500, 3,000 years ago. Even Sun Tzu, in his very famous book, The Art of War, that we're all aware of, is mentioning disinformation, misinformation as a very practical means of deception, of confusing the enemy, and that's something that hasn't changed. So jumping to the current definition, and I'm trying to use the European Commission's definition of disinformation here. Disinformation is the intentional creation and spread of verifiably misleading information, of verifiably misleading contents. So I would like to point out two major components here. First of all, the malicious intention, the intentional motive to spread disinformation. So errors in reporting or typos or even satire is not included in that definition because that's not intentional. But the intentional motive of spreading and disseminating disinformation is very central. And the second aspect would be the disguised presentation of disinformation, the fact that disinformation and contents related to disinformation and fake news are presented to be true and presented to be factual, well, when they're indeed not. And that brings me exactly to the threat that it poses, especially now, since the beginning of the year, since the global outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen an unprecedented spark in disinformation, coming from various different actors within the European Union and beyond, with the intentional aim, with the intentional motive to destabilize, to cause deception, to spread seeds of distrust, and to basically disinform the public and different stakeholders in order to create the notion of uncertainty and of confusion, to a point where disinformation aims to cause widespread confusion. And we have seen that also when we analyze the different narratives, the different contents that are being produced, when analyzing, for instance, but not exclusively, disinformation originating from Russia, we have seen that there are certain conflicting narratives that are being used, from narratives that say that COVID-19 has been artificially generated and has been created in laboratories, that it has been spread by US military soldiers in the Baltics. And the idea behind spreading these contradicting and conflicting narratives is that the audience, the recipient, European society and European citizens in general are being presented with so many different information and so many different contents that they cannot differentiate for themselves anymore what is actually true and what is wrong. So the notion is being created that unbiased and general truth is not possible, and therefore all information, all contents must be wrong to some extent, and therefore people actually are left without any possibility of differentiating anymore between fake news, between deliberately false, misleading, deceiving information and factual media outlets and factual governmental information that is being spread in order to inform the public. And we have seen various narratives. Thank you for mentioning before also that I've published an article through the AIS on disinformation campaigns. I've tried to outline different narratives that are being used, that we have seen since the beginning of the year, since January, when the first disinformation narratives have been logged and have been detected. Detection is certainly an important first step to actually then later raise awareness in the European public. And therefore, disinformation, due to the unprecedented spark and due to also the very fast spread of different information, it has become a threat to democracy, a threat to liberal rights, and also a security threat, since it's being used intentionally as a new tactic of attacking certain entities on this new digital field.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, from summarizing or kind of summarizing both of your statements, I mean, we see a lot of security implications for Europe or the general geopolitical landscape on a whole different levels. Sophia, you touched upon, like I already mentioned, the transatlantic security architecture and what it means for the future of European defense and security, also in regards to upcoming challenges to the east. And Michael, you've mentioned what this actually means in if you have to pin those challenges down. This could be among a lot of other challenges, for example, disinformation, which is very dangerous, and extraordinarily dangerous because it's not seen and not deciphered and depicted as a security threat in the first place. So, given all this, we have seen in Europe in the last years there have been security topics have been vividly discussed. Since Donald Trump became US president in 2016, there has been a spark in European security debates. This is also something Sophia touched upon, and we have also seen a lot of movement in strategizing and coming up with new policies to security threats. And there have been Germany came out with a framework nations concept in 2016. We have seen various moves by France's President Emmanuel Macron in the last years on the European Defense Initiative, on the European Intervention Initiative, and so on and so forth. We have seen new papers came out of London, out of the Netherlands, out of Belgium, where everyone seemed to focus on more autonomy or more NATO in some regards. So this was a huge discussion. Taking all this into account, Europe has been faced with a lot of shrinking geopolitical geostrategic importance. So, Sophia, that's a question for you. Which step would Europe, given all that strategies and new approaches, which concrete steps would Europe need to take to be regarded as a capable security and defense actor in the future?
Well, I would say that we already have enough papers. Everything has been written down and put on paper. So what we would need now is to start trying to implement what we've set out as goals. It's being already said a lot of the time that Europe needs to invest more, not just by the United States and Donald Trump, but generally you hear it often that the European Union or the European member states, they don't invest much in security and defense. They need to do more, they need to invest more, they need to spend more money. That's true on one side, but on the other side, it's not just about spending more money. It's about how you spend the money. It's about effective defense spending, I would say. So you need to avoid duplications, for one, which is a serious issue within the European Union, and it's very costly. And you need to cooperate more closely together. You need to establish, if you cannot put all the 27 member states together, you need to establish working islands of cooperation and start building from there. I mean, we already have the permanent structured cooperation, we already have the European Defence Fund. Those are great initiatives, but they're still at the very early stage. So we need to give them some time to see if they develop in the way we want them to, which of course depends a lot on the political will of the member states and now of the efficient financial assistance, which is in question due to COVID-19. And another issue that I see is that although the EU's big two, with the United Kingdom gone, I will not talk about the UK, we have France, we have Germany, both want a stronger European security and defense, but they have very different paths in order to achieve that. We have Paris, who is in favor of hard power and depth, and is, if I may say so, sometimes over-motivated for the rest of the EU member states who want to follow their lead. And then we have Germany on the other side, who is still kind of reluctant to take on more responsibility in security and defense, and they prefer breadth and soft power. So you have two very different approaches. And what the European Union would need is a common strategic culture in order to be able to effectively promote European values, European interests, and also be a credible actor within NATO itself as a European pillar. And so Brussels could do something in order to add more credibility to the goal of strategic autonomy. So I would highlight or mark it as bold, the word credibility. So we need to have actions follow the words. We need to have concrete measures and concrete action plans established on a regular basis in order to have a pool of capacities and capabilities to make a strong European presence, not just only in the field of economy, where it's partially already happening, and politics, but also in the military field and in the technological field, so that we have a kind of, if I'm allowed to say so, European first narrative in the good sense. So that's what I would answer to that question.
If you allow me one, thank you very much. If you allow me one follow-up question on this in particular, how would you say how will the Brexit, which means the exit of the UK defense and security capabilities, affect European defense and security capabilities in the future, also on a strategic level? Between, if you've focused on this triangle between London, Berlin, and Paris in the past, this is now maybe more a two-way street between Paris and France. So how will that play out in the future for Europe? What's your take on this?
Well, even though the United Kingdom was never a huge fan of deeper European defense integration, they were always blocking it one way or another, it's still going to be a huge loss for the EU, financially, strategically. The United Kingdom is a bridge to the United States, always with their special partnership. So it will be a loss. Also, in terms of capabilities, as you said, they're a great maritime power, and so on and so forth. So the ideal solution to that would be to try and establish a relationship that's as close as possible without the United Kingdom being part of the European Union anymore, to kind of allow them to still take part actively in our defense integration efforts, be it in missions and operations, be it in our space efforts, which they were a huge part of. And so we need to keep them close, even though they're not a member anymore, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying and getting a bit deeper into the topic. Those challenges and those measures that you mentioned, disinformation and hybrid threats, they always affect Europe as a whole. You cannot distinguish between national borders. So the way I see it is that Europe at the moment seems to be now coming a bit of age in a way, and this means that a big part of this is also to play the geopolitical game a bit different and a bit more thoroughly. So when it comes to disinformation, which is a huge aspect of hybrid threats and or in the cyber context, what recommendations would you, Michael, give European stakeholders and policymakers to counter disinformation on the one hand, and which measures could mitigate the effect of the disinformation has on publics and on politics, and how to build up resilience in that regard?
That's a very good and very huge question indeed. I think Sophia touched upon it a little bit as well, that we have to have a more comprehensive whole of Europe approach when we think of different, especially new threats to security. And you mentioned it as well, because that disinformation, but also other aspects, other means of hybrid threats, don't only affect single European member states, but the European Union as a whole, and every single member state individually as well. The WHO has classified the COVID-19 pandemic as an infodemic, basically saying that it doesn't know any national borders. It is affecting various entities on various levels at the same time. And that is indeed this widespread threat that we have seen now since the beginning of the year, that is, as I said, unprecedented and doesn't know any national borders. Having that said, the European Union has already implemented several measures. Disinformation is not new. The previous commission, before the current von der Leyen commission, has already established several mechanisms. For instance, in 2015, the European External Action Service and the East Stratcom task force have been established. This task force has particularly looked at the Eastern European neighborhood and disinformation linked to Russia. Their, so to say, major project, their lighthouse project was and still is the EU versus Disinformation platform, which has now, especially since COVID-19, since January this year, they have collected and thoroughly presented different cases of disinformation that are available on their online platform for everyone to see, which is very important because that raises awareness and also gives us the opportunity not only to talk about disinformation behind closed doors, but include it more in a sophisticated social dialogue as well. Another example is the 2018 Code of Practice on Disinformation, where the European Union has worked very closely together with Facebook, Twitter, Google, in order to tackle disinformation with those huge providers of digital space and social media platforms. especially preparing for the European election, the Parliament election 2019, to mitigate disinformation campaigns before and during the elections. And that has actually led to a closer cooperation with these entities, with Facebook, Google, Twitter in particular, where millions of accounts have been blocked or have been deleted by those social media providers because of a breach in this code of practice on disinformation. And probably it's also important to say that this is a voluntary code, and the European Union, through implementing this code, and these platforms through also acknowledging this code of practice, they're setting a new standard rule on disinformation that could also be used as a global new standard and a new regulation. And just recently, just 2-3 days ago, the European Digital Media Observatory was established and has now started working a platform bringing together fact checkers, independent fact checkers, which is very, very important in this context, media and the academia to jointly work on new strategies, tackling disinformation, monitoring different narratives. So these older measures and strategies are now being put to the test, and at the same time new ones are being developed. And my main recommendation would be not to stop developing new strategies, not to stop implementing those. Disinformation, hybrid warfare in general is such a fast moving, developing, very fluid, not very tangible new area of threats and of warfare that we also have to currently and continuously reassess our own strategies, develop new ones, and basically never stop being also as fast, as flexible to implement and develop new strategies on our own in order to be able to mitigate those new threats adequately.
Mm-hmm. So you're basically saying that in order to build up resilience against disinformation, actors need to have superiority over innovation, basically. That's
superiority is a strong word here. They control, definitely, and they have to also be more thoroughly involved in this whole game of information technology developments. But that's probably more the structural, institutional, governmental approach that we can take here. Individually, my appeal will go out to every single one of us, every single one who is using social media, who is getting their information from online media, to think twice, to be very critical, self-critical, and critical towards all the content that we consume online, and really thoroughly look at the outlet, at the author, at the content, at the images, the videos that are being shown here in online media and social media in general, and think twice before you share. Don't fall for these traps and these misleading information. Really be critical and be also self-critical towards personal biases that might occur. So I think that we all can play a role, especially when analyzing this information linked to COVID. Now we could see that every single disinformation content, every single post generated between 1,000 and 2,000 interactions through likes and shares. So people have been also responsible for spreading this information. If we could raise awareness across Europe about these threats, we can also mitigate them, because people would be less willing to share them and less more protected against disinformation, simply because they're more aware that this is becoming a threat.
Okay, so I think at this point it's worth mentioning that AIES sources and publications and Chapter publications and outlets are very trustworthy sources, also in times of disinformation and COVID. But joke aside, you touched upon a very different point, namely Infowars, or information warfare, or warfare over information and information as a resource. And basically, since if we look across the Atlantic, we have seen that on a weekly or sometimes even daily basis, with tweets from Trump and the debate about fake news that has been going on. So without wanting to go into detail, what it shows us that that the US is definitely also it's going to stay and is still is a very influential player, not only in terms of disinformation, but also in terms of course, the transatlantic relationship. So we have an upcoming election. Sophia, how would you see the transatlantic relationship changing if Trump stays president? And probably more specific, do you see NATO's role changing or declining if we see a re-election of President Donald Trump?
Well, I think it's not unrealistic to have Donald Trump win the election again, despite everything that is being said in the newspapers and the social media and everything. I personally think he has a fair chance of winning again. And if that happens, first of all, he will be reassured that the course of action he's held for the past 4 years is the right one. So I think he will continue that path, which means that he will continue to put pressure on the European member states to do more in the field of security and defense, defend for themselves, and so on and so forth, also financially. I think we will see a further withdrawal from the United States, from international agreements, international treaties. Now we have the issue with the Health Organization. He threatened to leave the WTO. He left the INF Treaty, recently the Open Skies, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the path he will set out to continue. And for us, for the European Union and for Europe in general, it will mean 4 years of more or less the same, if not a bit worse. And the insecurity that's already here because of his narrative, more or less, because of the things he says, will continue to exist, if not get bigger. But I would like to make a small remark here. I don't think it's necessarily true that if Trump doesn't get reelected, that everything will be fine again, that we will return to the situation before Trump. I think there's been a change, there's been a shift in the relationship with the US. And we kind of need to accept that and try to make the best of what we can going from there. So I just wanted to make that quick remark. It's not that Trump is absolutely bad and the other one, whoever that might be or could have been, is the good solution. So, and then you said something about NATO, right? NATO's role if Trump gets reelected.
Yeah, or more generally, even if he doesn't get reelected, how do you see NATO's role changing? Because it's a very, like, structurally, it's a heavy weight in the transatlantic relationship. Yeah.
Well, I don't see the role of NATO declining, at least not anytime soon. And here we have that ties very well with the disinformation that Michael was saying, because we have Trump's narrative on the one side. He says a lot of things that cause insecurity and unease in his European partners. But on the other side, we have the facts, which are that the United States are still committed to Europe. They still have a large amount of troops in Europe. They have increased their contributions to NATO during Trump's term in office, despite all the pressure, despite all his criticism, all his threats, and so on and so forth. So things may not be as black and white as they seem. And NATO, it's been around for 70 years. We had last year at the beginning of December, the last NATO summit, which marked the big anniversary. So that's alone quite impressive to say that it's been there for 7 decades. And NATO is an institution that can adapt to a changing environment quite easily. They develop new instruments, new tools to interact with the new security environment each time. So there is a good chance that NATO will survive the next couple of years or decades with the United States in it. I don't see the United States like abandoning its NATO commitments anytime soon, despite everything. So it might be regarded as an institutional relic from the Cold War because it reminds us of like the Soviet Union and so on and so forth. But it's also at the same time equipped better than any other, I would say, organization or institution to deal with possible future like threats and challenges, like China, for instance, because of the rich know-how NATO already has. So I think it's going to be around for a while.
Okay. You both touched upon China quite often throughout the throughout your inputs, and since we are about to end our talk pretty soon, I would just like to give you the floor, both of you, the floor once more to maybe say a few words about China, and Sophia, in your case, maybe more on the strategic level, more on the how China as a strategic threat to the East, as you framed it also in your input and introduction. How does that play out, and how maybe you can name 1, 2, 3 points that affect us and strategy and the security landscape in Europe. And maybe Michael, maybe you can outline a few actions from China on disinformation, in regards to disinformation. Like when it comes to disinformation, what should we focus on when it comes to China? Maybe really briefly, just adding a premium to our talk. After we have focused on transatlantic relations to the West, let's look to the East a bit as well.
Do you want to start, or shall I go ahead?
Can I start because it's general?
I think
you're
so
going
too.
to
It's probably better.
The depth again.
This turned out to be quite successful so far.
Exactly. Well, I would say that we have diverging interests among the EU and also NATO members when it comes to China. So it's going to be very difficult for both the EU and for NATO to establish effective and coherent policies towards China because of the role China plays in certain countries and because of the investments, financial investments, the Belt and Road Initiative, and so on and so forth. So NATO was quite right in putting it very delicately, challenges and opportunities that China represents for the West. I mean, we can certainly see that the United States will put a lot of energy and focus on China in the coming years. And the European Union and Europe in general should be extra careful, in my opinion, to not get caught in a very delicate balancing act between the US and China. Because on the one side, we have the United States, a long-standing strategic partner, and on the other side, we have China, an emerging power, also economically very strong. So the European Union should find a way to navigate, I would say, that could maybe be the correct word, navigate between those two great powers in a unique European way and try to be not an honest broker, but kind of try to find a balance that would suit best Europe and in general. Yeah, that's what I would say. But it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe Michael, maybe you can add one more point to this from your perspective.
Definitely. With regards to disinformation, we have seen quite a shift in China's strategies, China's narratives over the last already 1.5 years. Already before COVID-19, we have seen that Chinese official diplomats, embassy staff, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been more active on social media that is obviously trying to communicate to the Western world, the European and US American audiences, Twitter, Facebook, etc., social media that is blocked in China. So due to the increase in activities from official diplomatic accounts and also the relatively undiplomatic, almost aggressive way that China has been, through these official accounts, communicating with the West, we have seen a change in that dialogue, in that narrative, in that way of communication in general. And having that said, We have also seen that China has entered the disinformation game earlier this year. I've mentioned that disinformation linked to COVID-19 has been detected from European countries, from European member states, but in particular from Russia, but also very much also from China. So we have seen, and you can easily in my publications and other online publications find examples here. I don't want to go into depth of Chinese disinformation narratives that have been increasing from January, February onwards. And what is though also very important to point out and unprecedented is that European Union official the official bodies that I've mentioned before, EU versus Disinfo, and the European External Action Service have recently published reports to the European audiences, to the European societies, about disinformation linked to COVID-19, mentioning Russia and China as prominent actors here, which has sparked a very harsh criticism from China. Criticism that is probably going beyond the usual criticism and has been framed more and has been communicated more as concrete threats and warnings that the European Union should refrain from mentioning China in this context, and that potential economic and diplomatic repercussions will follow in case the European Union is portraying China as an actor of disinformation. Against this background, it's very important and crucial for the European Union not to give in to these kinds of threats and these kinds of pressures, in order to point out the realities that, yes, we have seen an increase in Chinese disinformation campaigns and Chinese disinformation linked directly to Chinese official sources, embassy staff, and diplomats. And yes, we should be able to mention that. We should be able to inform the European citizens about these developments, and also consider from European and from national approaches potential countermeasures and potential new ways of mitigating such disinformation campaigns.
Okay, well, thank you very much. What I hear from you both, especially not only on the last on your answers on the last question, but throughout our talk today, is that it is when it comes to security and defense, the architecture and the capabilities and measures in Europe, it's high time for Europe to come of age and get serious to get the future in their own hands and build up resilience and capabilities that can actually tackle challenges that are out there or, as of now, in the making. Complexity is not going to reduce and disappear. That's what I've learned today from you. I've seen that there are no more questions. There are no questions from the audience, and no questions have been coming up in the last couple of minutes. In this case, I would thank you all for being with us today. You're in the audience, and also a very special thank you to Sophia and Michael for their brilliant inputs and valuable expertise that they have shared with us today. I would also like to thank the AIES and Żabka for the opportunity to hear those insights today and convening all of us. I, for my part, have learned a lot, and encourage you all to check out publications in full, the ones that have been mentioned today and various others on the websites of the AIES and Żabka as well. You can, since when you're there, make sure to check out some other publications as well, not only those today. You can also find an updated list of events and latest information from both organizations on the websites. That's aies.at and Żabka.org, or by subscribing to our respective newsletters or visiting our social media outlets, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I wish you, again, thank you for being with us today. I wish you all a nice rest of the week. Really appreciated you being with us, and hope to see you in one of our next events. So stay tuned. Goodbye.
Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you for the moderation and the discussion.